Okay, what's up everybody? So, welcome to the addendum video that I'm going to be doing. Wow. First off, welcome to my channel. If you are new to the channel, please go and watch the part 1 of this video. It should be labeled pretty much the same title, just not have addendum on it. This is my entertainment industry series, so please go and watch some of the other videos. The earliest videos are basically building up a vocabulary between you and I so that we can have this same sort of vocabulary through and through as we talk about other film, television, and other forms of entertainment through the industry, okay? I wanted to make an addendum to the first cycle video, technically the second cycle video, the cycle video in which I talk about the generational cycle as it pertains to truth, reality, and beauty. As I've said before, everything is cyclical and you can't break the cycle because the cycle is a circle and a circle is perfect. So in that video, I tried to introduce you all to the generational cycle that we are currently on. And again, this is something that just, it happens all the time over and over and over again. I've told you guys that the cycle was, as it goes right now, is that the traditionalists made essentially a fake world for their children, baby boomers, to grow up in. And so what the baby boomers did is that they started, and as they grew up, as they finally reached adulthood, a lot of them looked around and they realized this is fake. This is a fake world. This isn't a fully truthful world. It isn't a fully beautiful world, so to speak. The next generation comes along, Gen Xers. They start questioning, well, what is beauty? What is truth? What is reality? So they build off the baby boomers' first statement and they turn that into a question, which then allows them to continue through life looking constantly for answers. So now let's move on to Gen X. Gen X has a very interesting way in which their eyes are somewhat open. Their part of the cycle is what is truth, or what is reality, what is beauty. So they come along, and luckily for them, they do not have the disruption of war in the same way that baby boomers did. Yes, they may have had baby boomer siblings. They may have even had baby boomer parents, but they probably had baby boomer siblings that they might have seen be drafted in Vietnam, but they themselves would never be able to be drafted because they're not old enough. So the whole idea of war for them, that's out of the question. Also, the civil rights movement, it's a very interesting thing because for a lot of schools around the world, schools tend to teach that the civil rights movement or the civil rights era was just that it was an era that essentially stopped mainly, I guess, with the assassination of one of the top three. You can pick either one, you can pick any of them, whether it's Robert F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, or Martin Luther King Jr. They kind of teach that, yeah, it pretty much stopped after that. So they don't really have a civil rights era thing either. What happens is that their flirtation with the cycle and how their eyes are open comes from a very different thing. It comes from a more internalized idea. They grow up in the era essentially of divorce. Now, you have to understand this, that the height of divorce was somewhere in, I believe, the early 80s, somewhere early to mid 80s. So around that time, most Gen Xers would still have been living in their parents' homes, probably would have been teenagers or a little bit younger than that, maybe tweens, maybe around 8 or 9 even. A lot of them grew up believing that their parents were always going to be together. You have to understand that before 1970s, there was no such thing as the no-fault divorce. One of the things that was right about the, or truthful about the world that baby boomers grew up in is that while there was a falsity that women did not work when they actually did, the truth is that women did have far fewer rights than men. And so oftentimes women could not file for divorce unless they had a high threshold for reason to file. Well, the 70s ushered in women's rights, which also with that came the idea of no-fault divorce. So anybody could divorce their spouse for any reason, which, you know, frankly, it's kind of a good idea. They didn't need to have have a reason for it, and they didn't need to show fault on either themselves or their spouse. So with that, you had the earliest born baby boomers who married young and had children young, as well as some of the latest born traditionalists. They all were married, had children, were fairly young, and started to realize, you know what? This ain't working. This ain't working. And so their children were the Gen Xers. And what tended to happen at that point in time is that Gen Xers started to live in this world which essentially had never existed before. Again, like I said, divorce rates were so low before the 1970s that you could have entire towns or entire communities in which people, not only did they not get divorced, not only were they not divorced, but people didn't even know of a person who was divorced. It was that big of a thing. Marriage was that big of a deal. And now Gen Xers are looking like, what is this thing? What is this thing in which both of my parents, not only are they not living with each other, they're not living in the same house, they are not with me and potentially my other siblings every day. But then also you had a ton of like fathers being vilified, and let me be very clear, I am not trying to excuse the fathers or the mothers. I'm not trying to excuse any of the parents for any of their actions. I'm just saying what tended to happen. You had a lot of fathers who would leave the house because it was always thought that mothers did better jobs of raising the children. So the men would leave, and then sometimes a lot of them would never come back. So what you had was, at the same time, you had the rise of two different things. One, you had the rise of the broken family, and then two, you had the rise of the step family, or everybody was like Brady bunching it up back then. With that came this idea in Gen Xers' head. The thing that they thought was beautiful no longer was as beautiful as they thought it was. So again, what is beauty? Because Gen Xers grow up in the time of divorce. And yes, there are some financial woes here and there, but those financial woes are mainly due to divorce. Now you can cite other things, and you can say, oh, well, you know, what about the oil crisis of, what was, I believe, the 70s? There was a stock market crash in the late 80s in 1987. I wasn't born for that, but there's all these things, right, that they supposedly go through. But those are not things that are incredibly defining to them, nor are they nearly as financially hurtful as the onslaught of divorce. From their perspective, they come up with or developed 4 subconscious mentalities. So the first one is that, just like with baby boomers, they have a mentality or ethos or pathos of rebellion. So they realize that the man that baby boomers were talking about, and that they learned kind of sort of from baby boomers, they can now put a definitive face to the man. And the man is, in some cases, their father. In other cases, it is their new stepfather, or men who are trying to get with their mother. So they thusly have to fight against the man and win. So that is where they kind of develop almost a sense of heroism from doing the things that they do. The second one is they get a sense of abandonment, or sense of being skipped over. What you see for movies that are made specifically for them in this era, from the mid 70s all the way through to the 90s, all the way up to 1991, is that you see a ton of stories in which you get teenagers and you get younger children who talk to or talk about the adults in their lives, usually their parents, in ways of abandonment of some sort, right? So you have the Breakfast Club, which everybody in there has this weird sort of relationship with their parents, and it feels like they are completely disconnected from their parents in a way that seems to go beyond teen angst. You have E.T., the kids in E.T., as well as, honestly, in Lean on Me, the adaptation of Steven Spielberg's short story Body. In both of those cases, you have the kids doing things on their own, not because that's just what kids do, but almost in some senses to fill in a void that has been left by one of their parents being gone, or just not really paying much attention, right? So you get a lot of stuff similar to that. And then, of course, once they grow up, they also start writing these stories of abandonment where it feels like they have been looked over or skipped over. And of course, this still plays out today. Gen Xers feel as if they have been skipped over or as if no attention is paid to them nearly as much. It's untrue. It's very untrue. And I'll get to that in a second, but that's how they feel. Then you also have this idea that runs through their mind of, for lack of a better word, they are critical, but they're specifically critical of systems that are in place already. The first system that they start to criticize and critique and think differently about is marriage. They look at marriage and they think to themselves, well, why is it that my parents can't seem to stay together? Why is it that because my parents are breaking up and they can't seem to stay together, all of these other bad things then happen because one system failed. One system failed to where your father and your mother can't stay together. And so your father leaves the house. But because your father leaves the house, that ultimately plunges you from being middle class, maybe, into a poverty line or below the poverty line kind of lifestyle. So now you're the poor kid at school, which then you most likely get bullied. Like, again, there are systems on top of systems that they look at. This, of course, is also seen in a lot of the music that they release. Like Tupac, I believe, was a Gen Xer, and one of his famous songs is Brenda's Got a Baby. In that song, he looks at the system that has created an environment in which a young, not legal girl is exploited and molested by an older gentleman who she thinks that she can trust. And I think he might be a family member, I'm not sure, but he looks at the system of that and how that affects all of us. He also does the same thing in his other song, Dear Mama, I believe, or is it just Mama? Yes, he is looking at his mother and how she became a drug addict, but he is also looking at the systems around her and around them that have led her to become this, and how she still tries to buck and defy that system by being as good of a mother to him as possible. You have NWA. They come out, they look at the system of the ghetto and the streets as it is. Again, you have a lot of different artists that come out and they look at the systems and critique them in ways that, yes, baby boomers sort of did, but baby boomers made anthems about things, whereas Gen Xers come in and they make critical statements about things. Okay, so it's slightly different. And then finally, they also have I sort of kind of mentioned it, they also have a mentality of, in some ways, a mentality of heroism, or a mentality of, I'm going to fix it. I guess you could say a better way of putting that would be pledges. They make a sort of heroic-like pledge to themselves and also to some of the people around them, you know, in their sphere of influence. And the pledge is essentially that they are going to be better than their parents. And that includes the father who, even if the parents did not break up, and even if the parents were happy together and they didn't break up, which again, that's it was a rare thing to see. Even then, the other idea of them being system critical would oftentimes lurk in and would have them saying that, well, we have to be better than our parents were because we can't continue in the same systems that we have. They make a pledge to be better than their parents, their father and their mother, and especially stepfathers. They have to be better than them. They just absolutely have to be better than the stepfathers. Their me moment, you know, their me moment comes from the idea of when their parents are getting divorced or getting separated, or their friends are going through that thing. The idea is that they think almost immediately like, well, I can't believe that you guys are ruining my life, because again, divorce affects not just couple and not even just the family, but it affects everybody. So one person's parents get divorced and you might not, your parents might still be together, but that person whose parents just got divorced was your best friend, and now they have to move because they can no longer afford to live in the house that they used to live in. And so now you potentially lose your best friend, etc., etc. It's a cascading ball of crap. So they come in and they look around and they say that they have to be better, which is interesting because even though they look at the systems of stuff like marriage and things of that nature, they still don't necessarily want to throw it away. I'm trying to think if I want to cover anything else from Gen Xers. I will say this: the perfect film from the era that epitomizes the Gen Xer mentality would have to be Star Wars, and specifically the story of Luke as it relates to Darth Vader, right? The entire story. And I'll say this right now, because it's going to be very controversial. I am going to do another video, and it's going to be talking about the same thing, the generational cycle, and how all that relates and reflects. And I'm going to be doing it on the Star Wars series, on the films, okay? And yes, I'm specifically going to focus in on 2 films. You just probably heard of the first one, The Empire Strikes Back. You know, that should have been immediately what you clued in on from what I said. And the second one will be one of the newer ones. Let's just say that. It's going to be super controversial, so you could probably think of which film I'm going to be using from that one. But I'm telling you, it's going to be crazy. But yeah, the idea, Luke is essentially not only the hero who's going to set the entire system, so to speak, of the empire, of the universe, or excuse me, of the galaxy. He's going to set that system correct. He's going to set it right. But he also has to defeat his own father, or the man, in order to do that. And it's him escaping what is essentially poverty to be placed in either a place of high exaltation, of high esteem, or of high riches. Now, of course, he chose the esteem here, but he probably could have gotten rich if he wanted to. And all of that because of the fact that, you know, his father basically left his mother. It's almost the exact mentality or ethos that Gen X essentially has, explained, wrapped up in one good movie, which is probably why Gen Xers love that movie so much. And so then I think I covered most of what I wanted to cover there. Again, this is getting long. I will probably separate it again from the Millennials, but we are going to try to cover the Millennials and then the Gen Zs. Hey, everybody. So while I don't have an official sign off yet, I guess I should do the whole please like, comment, share, and if you so desire and you want to see more, subscribe. But more importantly, I will ask that you please go and purchase one of my books. They are mostly ebooks, and pretty much they are all under $10. See if any of my work is actually any good, if it lives up to any of the things that I'm talking about here on my channel, specifically with the entertainment industry videos. So please go purchase my books. All of my links are down below. Thank you.